We all own things that were made by a machine. Your phone, your clothes, your notebook, they were all mass-produced in a factory. But it wasn't always this way. For almost all of human history, everything was made by hand. This is the story of that change. It's the story of the moment in history when we stopped relying on muscle and wind and started relying on machines. This industrial revolution didn't happen overnight, but its beginnings were like a spark that set the entire world on a new path. Try to picture life in the year 1700. There are no alarm clocks, no electric lights, no supermarkets. More than 8 out of every 10 people are farmers. Your life is guided by the sun and the seasons. You wake up, you work the land, you fix your own tools. Your family makes your own clothes. There's no commute and no weekend. Your world is your village. It was a hard life, to be sure, but it was predictable. This was the agricultural world, and it had been this way for thousands of years. The first small step away from this life was something called the cottage industry. Imagine you're a merchant in a town with extra money. You buy a huge bale of raw wool. You take that wool, ride out to a farm family's cottage and say, "I'll pay you to spin this wool into thread." You then take that thread to another cottage and say, "I'll pay you to weave this thread into cloth." This was the putting out system. It was like an early version of the gig economy. Work was still done at home, by hand, but it was being organized by a businessman for a wider market. The real, massive change, the spark for everything, didn't happen in a city. It happened on the farm. We call it the agricultural revolution. For centuries, farming was very inefficient. You'd plant seeds by just scattering them, and most would be eaten by birds. Then, inventors like Jethro Tull created things like the seed drill, a machine that planted seeds neatly in rows. Farmers learned to rotate their crops, using plants like turnips to put nutrients back into the soil instead of letting it go bad. It sounds simple, but this was a total game changer. At the same time, a new, more capitalist idea of farming, from our last lesson, was taking hold. For centuries, villages had common lands that everyone could use to graze their animals. But wealthy landowners realized they could make more money if they consolidated all this land into one giant, efficient farm. This was the Enclosure Movement. They put up fences and walls, enclosing the common land and kicking the villagers out. It was great for food production, but it was a disaster for the families who had lived there for generations. This new farming was so efficient that it had two massive and opposite effects. On one hand, more food meant people were healthier and fewer people starved. This, combined with better sanitation, led to a massive population boom. The number of people in Britain began to skyrocket. But at the same time, these new, efficient farms didn't need as many workers, and the Enclosure Movement was forcing thousands of families off the land. So you suddenly have this new, huge, landless, and unemployed population wandering the countryside. Now you have two problems that are about to crash into each other. You have a massive population boom, which means a huge demand for basic goods. All these new people need to eat, and they all need clothes. The old cottage industry, with one person spinning thread in their living room, just can't keep up. And at the same time, you have thousands of landless farmers who are desperate for any kind of work. The stage is perfectly set. If someone could just invent a faster way to make stuff, they would have a huge market and a ready-made workforce. So why did this all happen in Great Britain? Why not France or Spain or China? Part of it was just dumb luck. Britain won the geographic lottery. It was an island, so it didn't have to worry about being invaded, and it had amazing harbors for trade. More importantly, it was sitting on top of massive, easy-to-reach deposits of two key materials: coal to burn for fuel and iron ore to build with. As we'll see, these were the food and bones of the new industrial world. It wasn't just geography. From our last lesson, Britain's economic and political climate was perfect. Its mercantilist empire was bringing in huge profits, so its businessmen had capital, money ready to invest in a risky new idea. It had a stable government that, thanks to capitalism, strongly believed in protecting an inventor's private property. If you invented a new machine, the government would give you a patent so no one could steal your idea. This gave people a huge financial incentive to innovate. The first industry to break was textiles. This makes sense. After food, clothes are the most basic human need. The demand created by the population boom was enormous. The old cottage industry was just too slow. So all these inventors with money and new ideas focused on one problem. How do we make cloth faster? This is where the race to industrialization really begins. The problem was a bottleneck. It took many spinners, usually women, to produce enough thread for one weaver, usually a man, on a hand loom. Then John Kay invented the flying shuttle, which let the weaver work twice as fast. This was great for him, but it made the thread bottleneck even worse. The solution was James Hargreaves' spinning jenny. It was a simple machine that let one operator spin 8, then 16, then 80 threads at once. Finally, the spinners could keep up. It was like going from typing with one finger to typing with all 10. These first inventions were still small enough to be used in a cottage. But the next one changed everything. Richard Arkwright's water frame was a giant, powerful spinning machine that was way too big for a cottage. It was also heavy, expensive, and needed a ton of power. So much that it had to be run by a giant water wheel. This was the moment of creation for the factory. You couldn't bring the machine to your home. You had to go to the machine. People, for the first time, went to work in a building built just for this purpose. These new mills or factories popped up all along fast-moving rivers. But this created a new bottleneck. What if your town wasn't on a good river? What if the river froze in the winter or ran low in a dry summer? Your entire business would shut down. The new industrial machine needed a new heart. It needed a power source that was reliable, powerful, and most importantly, portable. It needed something that could run 24/7, anywhere you wanted. The answer was steam. An early, clunky version of the steam engine already existed, but it was James Watt who in 1776 created a dramatically improved and efficient version. This is, hands down, one of the most important inventions in human history. Watt's steam engine meant you no longer needed a river. You could build your factory anywhere. You could build it in the middle of a city right where the workers were. All you needed was a load of coal to burn. This machine untethered manufacturing from nature. The steam engine also perfected the factory system. This wasn't just a building, it was a new way of life. Before, you worked at your own pace. Now, the machine set the pace. You didn't work by the season, you worked by the clock, punching in for a 12 or 14-hour shift. And you didn't make a whole product. You performed one tiny, repetitive task over and over. This division of labor was efficient, but it was also mindless and brutal. You were just another moving part in the giant steam-powered machine. And what fed the steam engine? Coal. Coal was the magic fuel. It was far more energy-dense than wood, and Britain had tons of it. The entire industrial world would soon be built on a foundation of coal. This new King Coal had a dark side. Coal mining was incredibly dangerous work, and burning all that coal, especially in cities packed with new factories, created a thick, black, toxic smog that choked the air and covered everything in soot. At the same time, you can't build a 10-ton steam engine out of wood. It would shake itself to pieces. All these new, powerful machines needed a new, stronger material. That material was iron. Using new methods, builders learned to use coal to smelt iron ore into high-quality, cheap iron. Iron became the infrastructure plastic of the 1800s. It was used to build the machines, the factories, the bridges, and soon, the railroads. Now, let's put all the pieces together. Remember those landless farmers from the Enclosure Movement? They are being pushed out of the countryside, desperate for a job. At the same time, new factories, powered by steam, built of iron, and full of textile machines, are being pulled into cities. This created a massive historic migration called urbanization. People flooded from the farms into new industrial cities, which seemed to spring up overnight. This new city life completely shattered the old social order. In the village, you knew your place. In the city, two new competing classes emerged. First was the industrial working class, the men, women, and children who worked in the factories. They lived in tiny, overcrowded, and unsanitary apartments called tenements. Their lives were defined by the factory whistle. Above them was the new industrial middle class, or bourgeoisie, the factory owners, merchants, and bankers who built and managed this new system. They became incredibly wealthy and began to demand political power. So that's the beginning. It's a clear chain reaction. The agricultural revolution created the food and the workforce. New demand for clothes led to the first inventions in textiles. The move to factories powered by water and then steam was the real game changer. This new system, fueled by coal and built with iron, pulled millions of people into new cities and created new social classes. The stage was now set for the full industrial revolution, which would bring railroads, telegraphs, and a whole new set of problems that would define the modern world.